Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. Kind of nice to be back to Max Planck. So what is this story about? Before we start, for me to get an idea of what people's backgrounds are, who here knows of the INRIA Institute in France? Okay, quite a few. For the others, it's a research institute in France like Fraunhofer or Max Planck. They do a lot of research. To me, having spent time in Germany, it's kind of a mix of Max Planck and Fraunhofer in the sense that they do a lot of industry collaborations, but they do also a lot of basic research. And who knows of scikit-learn? Okay. And for the rest of you, it is, if you do statistical machine learning in Python, chances are that you use this library. And you might have ended up on this homepage of the project. This is what we maintain. I ended up being one of the maintainers a couple of years back. And funny story, just a couple of days ago, because GitHub was being a bit grumpy with us about our documentation repo being too large, at some point we reached 100 gigabytes, we were trying to clean things up, and we deleted the whole repo. So for about half an hour, the documentation was not available. And we were lucky that many of us were in the same room for the Scientific Python Summit in Copenhagen when that happened, and this is us recovering the repo. So, who am I? I got my PhD in machine learning in cancer diagnostics in Max Planck for Informatics in Saarbrücken. And after that, I started doing some machine learning consulting, during which I had some time. I started doing some open source. I started with TensorFlow back then. This is back 2016, 17. I realized very quickly that TensorFlow is not an open community kind of project. It's a Google product. I moved on. I started contributing to scikit-learn. They were really friendly. I stayed there. 6 months later, end of 2018, I woke up to an email asking if I want to be a maintainer. And that completely changed my career. Since then, I moved to Anaconda, which is a Python company. These are the folks responsible for Conda. If you, again, do Python, you might be familiar with that. And then I worked at Zalando, Hugging Face, and now I'm at probabl. In the meantime, I maintain scikit-learn, fairlearn, scops, the few libraries in this ecosystem. So where did scikit-learn come from? It came out of education. It was a Google Summer of Code project, and then it was somewhat adopted by INRIA in Saclay, near Paris. People started working on it. A lot of people are there, and it stayed that way for a while. But this is back when I remember trying to do machine learning in 2016 in the industry, and my boss telling me why I can't implement a random forest or a decision tree in SQL. So back then, it was like a very different vibe in the industry. And it is very open governance in the sense that it is really hard to claim ownership because all decisions are made among all the maintainers, and we really are distributed all around the globe. And it is still very much growing. Right now, we have 30 to 40 million downloads a week. And the level of intensity that brings to the project is interesting. We have so far more than 32,000 opened issues and pull requests. We have, at any given time, 500 to 600 open pull requests. These are like contributions from us or outside. We have 1,600 to 1,700 open issues. It is quite intense work. So how do we maintain this? How do we keep going on? The funding history, as I said, INRIA was supporting it, but because it was very open governance, people around the globe started contributing. For instance, we had a PI, a professor in New York, who got some funding and hired 2 people, and they were the 3 of them contributing to the project. We had somebody else from, I think, Sydney University, who for a couple of years was working on it. We had another PhD student, I think, from Beijing, who was working on it for a couple of years. But that is it comes and goes. Sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher. How do you increase that? And that's where somewhat we like come into play. And then, as I said, it did start as being in the education. Like after a couple of years, it became one of the standards to be used in the industry. But now it is moving towards being a part of the infrastructure. Even if you might not use it directly, chances are that you use libraries that use it. And people take it as granted. It's like at this point, people think it's always been there. It's just there. It doesn't seem to move much if you don't look closely, maybe. But how do we maintain this piece of infrastructure for machine learning at this point? That's where the French government came in. And they were like, okay, like we are worried about our AI and machine learning sovereignty. We want to support some people in this space. And one of those people, one of those groups was INRIA. And the way it worked was they thought, okay, we give some money to two things. One of them would be a company. It should be a spin-off from INRIA. And the other one would be a program called P16 that does a lot of research at INRIA in the same space. And us, probabl, and P16, we work very closely together. And we do have co-founders who are members of both places. For example, Gaël Varocco is a director at like INRIA, and he works very much on P16. And what is it? It is supported by France 2030 as part of the National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence. P16 aims to reinforce the technological and autonomy of France and Europe through the development of sovereign, open, and interoperable software libraries covering the entire data cycle. This mission is very close to what also we do at probabl. So what is the idea? The idea is that the company needs to be self-sustaining with that initial funding, and it needs to support certain open commons. It was created because we were maintaining scikit-learn, but it's not only supporting that, it's a part of the ecosystem. And we need to have some revenue streams that support that development. What are those revenue streams? It's a product, we do support, we do consulting, and we do training. And I'm very happy to get more like detail into those things if there are questions. So what we want to do is to support the data scientist's journey from the beginning to the end and expand what we support. Because scikit-learn is very stable, there are other areas where there are gaps and we want to fill them. And create new libraries if needed. The reason that we wouldn't add these things to scikit-learn is that people have an expectation of somewhat extreme stability from scikit-learn. So breaking things is really hard, and sometimes moving direction is really hard. It's much easier to create a new baby thing and try things out there. And we have to have a commercial offering. So we need to figure out what that is. As a part of those things, one of them is Scrub, which is, okay, like historically, as a scientist, you would have a matrix, your numerical data, I don't know, like you have your gene expressions. You have some sort of a numerical data, it's a massive matrix, and then you want to do some machine learning with it. But in the industry, you usually have a data frame. You have different columns. Some of them are categorical, some of them are strings, some of them are numerical, they might have correlations. There's a lot of missing values. How do you deal with them? It would be quite hard to figure that out with just scikit-learn. With Scrub, it gives you a really decent baseline, and we do quite a bit of research and benchmarking, figuring out what are the same baselines if you just show me some data. And we've seen people even in Kaggle use that and just like attach a learner at the end of it and like be in top 3 of the competition. So it is been pretty successful. Another thing is scopes where it is an answer to the insecurity issues, vulnerability issues in Pickle when you persist your models and then you load them in Python. That can just like run arbitrary code. How do we avoid that? That was a really hard problem. We worked on it. We provided something, and the community seems to be liking it. The usage is growing up, scikit-learn endorses it, and these are the weekly downloads of that project. And at the end, we also have this score, which is, okay, you are a data scientist. You might not be aware of certain pitfalls of your practice. For instance, your data might be imbalanced, and you might be using accuracy as your score, or you shouldn't. You might want to use like imbalanced accuracy. You are working on fraud. You probably shouldn't be looking at your AUC. You probably should be looking at your precision recall. And there are like legal implications on like the thresholds that you pass in that practice. All of that is something that we all know, and it is pretty much the same like in the whole industry. This is a place where we can implement all of those rules for you. So it is basically for us data scientists' best friend for predictive modeling, and the makers of scikit-learn are working on it. So how do P16 and probabl work together? There are certain areas where it is for us very, like as a company, too risky to go into. There's a high level of uncertainty, but if you're in research, it's much easier to work on them. For instance, working on a foundational model for tabular data. We have Gael's team works on TabICL, there is like a model coming out of that. Working on different methods of cleaning the data that go into Scrub. Again, it is done at INRIA, not in the company. But at the same time, those artifacts, all the results that come out, they would be integrated into our product. We adopt them, and we work closely with them to tell them what our problems are to see if they can figure out a solution to that. So what are the challenges? It hasn't all been really easy and, bloomy. Well, the French government is a government, like any other government. It means that they promise something, they don't deliver, or maybe they changed their ideas. For instance, we were supposed to get a certain amount of money, no questions asked, and then it changed into, oh no, you need to go find private funding before we match how much private funding you find. That completely changes the game, because instead of a self-sustaining company, we have to be a company that is attractive to VCs. We raised 5 million at some point, and then now recently we raised again 13 million, and that is pretty much 50% from private funding, 50% from the government that is matched. And these are those together. We have had to change many things internally. The path has been pretty rocky. Also, it brings the question: how do we make sure that we keep our mission of supporting those open source commons? How do we make sure that we don't become only a VC style money thirsty company, and we spend money on and resources on the libraries that we want to support? There are different ways. For instance, our core, our identity comes from those libraries. If those are not there, one of our distribution channels are gone. And that's how you motivate why you need to be in that game. You have to find capitalistic motivations for the good things you want to do. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. And then the other thing is, what are the implications about the dynamics with the broader open source community? So far, there have been no company massively supporting this library, and now suddenly one company comes in and says, I'm the official holder of the trademark, I control certain things, and I have a lot of maintainers for this library. Why would that not demotivate other companies put resources in this library? Why would that not demotivate people who just volunteer for the library? Staying friendly to the community, keeping that open governance, making sure that in our technical committee, like leadership, we have not more than 50% from the same entity. These are all things that we try to do to make sure we don't alienate the rest of the community. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. I invite questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience?
Hi, Daniel from TU Dresden. Very interesting. So 2 questions. One is, how have you decided for the legal setup that might help to keep the focus on the mission rather than making more money? Or is there anything specific that you went with? And the second thing is, where does your mandate of focus end? Because probably deep down in the stack, you are still relying on some little library that's maintained by 2 volunteers. So where do you try to keep your focus, or how deep can you go?
Great questions. For first one, the mission of supporting open source is in our bylaws. So it's like a purpose company, you put that in. We've seen that before. It can always happen that when some funding comes in, they can be very aggressive and they force you to change the bylaws, but the probability is lower, and as long as it's there, we support it. And as I said, the other part is that we do find motivations for the funders for us to keep funding them. One of our funders is actually funding us because they used our stack heavily and they want to sustain it, therefore they're funding us. That particular funder is not that much interested in us making money, it's more about us keeping the lights on for these libraries. And the other one, we work very closely with other companies and entities in this space. For instance, if you take QuantSight, they are another company that they work a lot on open source on this stack. They work on NumPy, SciPy, PyTorch, JAX, and when we get funding, for instance, we have a CZI grant where we pay somebody in QuantSight to work on scikit-learn. At the same time, they have a NASA grant, NASA ROSES grant, where they pay us to work on scikit-learn. And whenever there is an issue, very often it's either in our dependencies in the stack going down, it's NumPy, SciPy, OpenMP, BLAS. We report them down. In SciPy, NumPy, we sometimes contribute. But when it comes it goes more down, then those developers handle it because it's a little bit outside our expertise. But we do collaborate very much up until even CPython. We have had, for instance, we have JobLib where there's a lot of scheduling and a lot of persistence stuff, and some of the things that we had in JobLib that would make loading and working with NumPy arrays much faster, they ended up going into the latest protocols of Pickle. So that flow of collaboration is always there.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting talk. I have to admit I'm not very familiar with all this venture capital and all the rest of it. But I'm just wondering, this now looks like, okay, you said it's a spin-out or startup, a spin-out from INRIA, and you explained at length how you serve the community and the mission and so on and so on. But do you think, and maybe it's a naive question, basically probably it depends on the price, is there a risk that the company might be bought up by one of the big players in the field?
Very much. Whether that's a risk or not is a good question. That definitely, as soon as you start talking to VCs, that becomes a very real question because they want an exit. And that exit is either you raising another round and then they get their money and they're out, or the whole company gets bought and then they get their money and they're out. They're not here for the good of humanity, they're here for the money. How you play that dynamic is the real question. We have seen some good stories. Companies get bought by the bigger players and that becomes a good story. But we've also seen sad stories even, for instance, supporting the performance of Python, making Python much faster was a mission at Microsoft. They hired a lot of people. They hired Guido, like who made Python. And then at some point, they fired the whole team. So there is no certainty. And yes, that is a risk. And unless the public sector steps up its game on how much resources and money they put into these things, you always have that risk. Because for us, we have no other option. We would be very happy to be on public funding and our mission to be only to support like scikit-learn and be able to pay the very senior people who like need to work on these libraries, but where's the money?
Thank you very much. Any other question from the audience online? No? Okay. I have a question of my own. I'm very interested in this open governance. I'm not big in the software development game, but I know that community-led projects are not very easy to coordinate. So on a practical basis, how are decisions made? Like, can you explain that?
We had a very interesting history in the sense that it used to be consensus-based. But in an unhealthy way of every decision has to be unanimous consensus. And when you have 10 very opinionated core developers, that becomes really hard. So at some point, this was in 2018, we started working on a governance model where we would be able to call for a vote. So now the process is that as long as everybody agrees, as long as you have at least 2 maintainers who are like +1, yes, we can do this, then you can do everything. But when it comes to major decisions or when there is like a disagreement, somebody says no, you can write a proposal and then you can call for a vote. And if the broader community, like all of the like core contributors, which includes our documentation team, communication team, we vote. If we get 2/3 of the cast vote in favor, then it passes. And it has happened that like we would pass something with 1 person saying no. If we don't get 2/3, then it goes to technical committee, and that's like 50% of the technical committee. In that 6-7 year history of the technical committee, there was only 1 case where the technical committee had to make a decision. And it was a very pointless thing. It was like, do we keep 80 character long like in code or 88? In all major ones, luckily there has been like agreement. But a part of that is us trying to keep the core community healthy. We have had cases where somebody would nominate a new person as a core member, and another person would say, actually my interactions on GitHub with this person has not been very healthy. We would go and check, like, oh, that's true. We would wait for another 6 months. We would like give feedback to that person. 6 months later, we're like, okay, like, is it good enough? Yeah, now it's good. And then that person is now a member of the team and is actually a very productive member of the team. So keeping the community healthy is a big part of it. And I like this saying that in a lot of cases, communities lose their soul and character by lack of action. And these days we have to do a lot of that. We ban people from the org on almost daily basis, if not like weekly basis. We have a lot of like spammy AI generated contributions. Sometimes people are rude. You have to be really quick responding to them. When somebody's rude and you don't respond, other observers see that, okay, like this is not a community that cares about that. So I remember like telling somebody off immediately after they say something rude on GitHub, and then another person comes to me privately and thanks me for doing that, because then that makes them feel safe. So there's a lot of community work that we do there.
Great, thank you. It's a very democratic process and a lot of community management.
Yes.
Thank you for explaining. Okay, if there are not any other questions, then I thank you very much.
Thank you very much.